Are you a tax professional? What exactly does that mean to you, to your clients, and to the general public? What is expected of you? What will make you stand tall and be respected just like a true professional should be? Of course, it goes without saying that the annual tax conference, which has been held yearly for the past 27 years, is a gathering of tax professionals. The 27th Annual Tax Conference was held in Abuja from 12th to 16th May 2025, and today we are sharing with you the session specifically targeted at the tax practitioners. The topic, of course, is Tax Practice in Nigeria, Balancing Professionalism and Ethics. And the paper presenter was no other person than Yomi Olugbenro, West Africa Tax Leader at Deloitte.
The second topic for today is on tax practice in Nigeria, balancing professionalism and ethics. To chair this session, permit me to invite our revered past president in person of Chief Mark Anthony DK FCTR. To our lead paper for today, speaking to this topic, permit me as I invite the West African tax leader, Deloitte, Mr. Yomi Olugbenro, FCTR, to discuss the paper for Yomi Olugbenro this morning. We have our legal advisor in CITN in person of Mrs. Titilola Akinlawon, FCTI, SAN. Also discussing the paper this morning, we have a professor of law, University of Lagos, Professor Abiola Sani, FCTI, SAN. Also as a discussion this morning, we also have a former Vice Chancellor, Nasarawa State University, and a member of the Governing Council of our institute, Professor Mahmoud Akaru Mainoma, MNI, FCTR. Also as a discussant this morning, we have the former MBA president, Mr. Wale Olanipekon. And finally, we have a partner with Adanse. Let's make welcome Yemi Adediran, FCTR. The next 80 minutes will be considered to the chairman of session who coordinates this. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much, sir.
The topic I'm to speak on, as you can see on the screen, it's also one that I believe is very fundamental and very important to all of us in this room as professionals. This is our space, this is our field, and so the subject of tax practice and how do we bring in professionalism and compliance with ethical standards. It's really fundamental if this profession is going to continue to be as rewarding as we all expect. So I'll try to do a little bit of intro. Thankfully, I have very seasoned and even very senior discussants to be able to bring broader perspective to the topic. So I will look at, the profession, the context and the environment, do a little bit of current state assessment, where are we with respect to the topic of professionalism and ethics, and share some ideas on what we could do as stakeholders to deliver on this conversation, and then some closing thoughts. My starting point is really to just kind of refresh our mind and be assured that we contextualize the topic appropriately. So what we're talking about here is professionalism. What we're talking here is ethics or ethical standards. And as a professional organization, or any professional organization for that matter, or any profession, there are requirements for some level of skills level of competence, expertise, depth, skill, experience that is required to practice that profession. And the same applies to our own profession. So this expertise and competence is demonstrated through the level of knowledge or mastery of your field, the experience you have gathered, which ensures that you know what to do, you know how to do it, and you earn the respect of all the stakeholders. And by ethical standards, just as a refresher, I'm referring to those broad principles and values that guide our professional behavior and conduct. Things such as honesty, integrity, transparency, fairness, good judgment, those kind of principles that ensure that we are able to maintain the discipline that is required within the profession. And I'm sure we do know that our institutes do have codes of conduct, codes of professional behavior that is expected. And these things are important because when we uphold professionalism and ethical standards, we can build trust. Trust of our clients, of our professional colleagues, and of all the stakeholders of revenue authority, of government, and the public can see us as who we truly want to be seen as. So that's the conversation we're going to be having. And my first slide is really to, again, look at the various stakeholders that these conversations, will impact. Or if you like, if you see yourself as a tax practitioner or as a tax professional, who are the other people, within your practice that you will relate with? And their contribution and your contribution ultimately, determine the level of professionalism and ethical compliance that we are referring to. On the one hand, I spoke about the client and the taxpayers. So these are the people who have obligations to render their tax returns. Some of them, because of the complexity of what is required to do so, or the fact that they will rather focus on their own area of, core competence, they have engaged practitioners and experts like us to help them. So they have specific expectations that you will guide them through the law, ensure that within the bound of the law, they pay the least amount of taxes that is payable, and that you act in their best interest. So there is that group. There is the revenue authorities representing the government who are administering the law, and they're not the lawmaker. They have the law already made, handed to them, and their role and responsibility is to ensure that as much as is within the law again, the government maximizes its yield to the purse. There is the professional body which our institutes, belong to, that regulate the practice of the profession, maintain the standard that is required, and expect that as members of the institute, we operate within certain bounds. Then we as practitioners and our team member, we can call ourselves the fourth pillar. Your colleagues, your partners, your associates, your team member with whom you work, some senior, some, learning the ropes and watching what you ahead are doing. And of course, we have the society that also do have an expectation. They are not paying taxes, they haven't paid, or they have paid the taxes, they are not the one that engaged you, and they have expectations of all of us. If you move to the next slide, I then identified at least 6 things that I expect from the element of what constitutes a professional practice of repute. If you call yourself a tax practitioner, certain things are expected, and I identify a few of them. The first is technical competence. As a professional, in fact, the word professional is an aberration if used to describe someone who lacks the technical know-how for that area of practice. So technical competence is the first one. Knowledge of tax laws, the regulation, even the business and the industry of your clients to be able to apply the law appropriately, the insight you have, how you stay updated with laws, with regulations, with the business model, with what is changing on around the world, all of that form technical competence. And it's an important element of what constitutes professional practice. The second is professionalism. How you demonstrate competence, how you you bring to bear the knowledge and the experience you have. There is a certain type of courage, of presence that a professional commands that makes you worth the salt. So demonstrating competence, demonstrating expertise, being excellent at what you do, right combination of skill, right combination of knowledge, personal attribute, personal courage, consistent delivery of quality, reliable service, all of that is what I refer to as professionalism. The third is ethical standards. And professionalism and ethical standard is really the key focus of the conversation. How do you adhere to code of professional conduct? How are you acting with integrity, with honesty, with transparency? How are you maintaining objectivity, confidentiality, maintaining independence? All of these, it's under the ethical standard. But the fourth one, which is also very important and may not necessarily be the focus of the conversation, but quite relevant to it, is interpersonal skill, relationship skills. You cannot practice this profession without understanding the importance of network, the importance of relationship, the importance of knowing how to relate with clients and with revenue authorities. So strong relationship, network, with regulator, with client, with colleagues, your ability to communicate, your ability to relate at a different level. That's the fourth one. The fifth is risk management. How well you are able to identify and manage risk. Because as you will see in my presentation, some of the ethical dilemma that you will face may not necessarily have been pre-planned. But how are you able to identify risk and mitigate and plan? How do you ensure that your scope of work is defined and you can defend yourself should your judgment be questioned? Then the sixth one, just for the sake of time, is talent development or talent management. Because as you continue to grow, as you continue to relate, you realize that you will have colleagues, you will have member of staff, and you need to be able to build capability in everybody that represents your brand. It's not all of the time that you as a manager or you as a partner or you as a senior manager will be at every forum. So how are you offering capacity building and professional development and growth opportunity, including succession to your team? So those elements, just put it somewhere behind, and as we talk through, you can then evaluate where you rank or what needs to be built upon to ensure that the subject of ethical compromises and lack of professionalism can be dealt with. If you go to the next slide, I try to picture the conversation that we're having this morning by putting a dilemma that can help explain what we're talking about. Because what we are discussing today is situation where, or how can we get professionalism, up? How can we uphold ethical standard? Or why are we seeing lack of conformity to them? In this ethical dilemma, I've tried to explain how each of the stakeholders faces, real-time challenges that, bring to bear this challenge, this issue we're discussing. Number one, we have the clients who, even legally speaking, have the legitimate expectation to say, within the band of the law, I must pay the least amount of tax payable. Nobody likes throwing away money. So your client have that obligation, and it is within the right of every taxpayer to so think. But beyond that, there are instances where these clients face real-time practical limitations where they may not necessarily have all that is required to legally bring down their tax liability. They don't have the right documentation, or for some reason the records are no longer available, or for some reason they don't truly understand the tax implication of that transaction and they have gone into it. So they have a dilemma of how do we bring down this liability as much as possible, starting from what is legal to what they will consider what they can bear. All right? That's on the one hand. You have the consultant who recognizes the fact that if I help my client to achieve its aim, I can make more money. I can gain loyalty. I can continue to sustain its patronage. And so you are faced with a situation where you want to help your client, who is your own primary employer, to minimize their tax obligation or liability as much as possible. You have the revenue authorities who recognize the fact that until you are able to legally defend yourself, you cannot reduce the exposure. They hear all of your grammar, but this is what the law has said. But on top of that, like every other profession and every other practice, public and private, there are unscrupulous members who think your challenge creates an opportunity for me for self-profiting. So if I help your business, you help my business. And so you have an obligation to help reduce liability. Your client doesn't have the document. You don't know how to challenge it. There are instances where you could have people who may want to profit from that scenario. You have the system that is so manual-driven, requiring a lot of interface, and unless you pass through those tables and say exactly the same story, you are not going to get along. You have the society. I love the quote by Mr. Deikpaye, I believe, earlier in the first session. All right? When people don't know what to do, they just essentially just follow what majority of the people are doing. So the society, including your client, have heard it over and over that, look, there are ways to do this. Why are you being fussy? Why are you being difficult? I don't have the document, but I've heard that there are other players within our industry who don't have the same documentation, but somehow they have been able to bring their own liability down. What were they doing? What did they do? Right? And then all sorts of things, from weak enforcement to these things have been perpetuated to a point where it just looks like it's now norm to find a way of getting through what you want. This is the dilemma that is faced on an everyday basis. When this happens, you see all sorts of things that then become evidence of an unprofessional environment, an environment where ethics have been compromised. And there are many things that you can see, including, if we're going to be honest to ourselves, a number of them very prevalent even in our society, even in our own profession. And the reason we're discussing it this way is that if this thing is going to change, the crowd of people that are in this room are enough to ignite the fire, to be able to get the right direction. So what are the evidences that we see to assure ourselves that ethical standards might have been compromised or professionalism is not, at the level it should be? You see incompetence and substandard service. Do we see such in, this practice? Of course. The scenario that the chairman was trying to describe, it's one, you see all sorts of things. You see certain types of returns, you see certain types of opinion, and you're like, a professional prepared this. So incompetence and substandard service is one evidence to know that this field, it's not maintaining the level of professionalism. You see people demonstrating lack of knowledge, lack of skill, lack of expertise, and rendering opinion. Number two, you see dishonesty and unprofessional behavior. Behavior that is unbecoming, engaging in deceitful, dishonest, and this thing is not on, a particular group alone. In fact, all of the stakeholders that I identify could be, part of all of this, because sometimes it's very easy for us to, point accusing finger at a particular stakeholder. And I do believe very strongly that quite a number of times, the regulatory authorities receive an unfair share of that complaint. And I must say it's an unfair share because there is no receiving without giving. All right? And if we are blaming that the revenue authorities compromises and they're unethical, but they don't pay themselves, they don't do all of this. Some people bring they tempt them or they offer. So this thing cuts across dishonesty and unprofessional behavior. We see misrepresentation, we see falsification. Sometimes I pity the revenue authority somehow. They see, and this probably completely falsified and assisted by certain clients, different versions of financial statement, different versions of returns. And you expect the revenue authority, to look idly, all right? Bribery and corruption, of course, that's usually the signpost for what we consider unprofessional behavior, criminal behavior, but like I said, it involves both offering and receiving. So there is a receiver, but there is also always a giver, a client that is involved, a consultant that is involved. And these things I'm discussing, it's not practices by those who are outside of this room. This conversation is actually things that relate to all of us in this particular room. I'm not saying this example relates to people outside. In this room, we will have a fair share that will go around to even people in this particular room. Conflict of interest is another, when you can differentiate between your personal interest and the interest of your client or even the interest of the nation. Confidentiality breaches, reputational damage, or professionals being hounded by law enforcement to come and explain. And obviously, general decadence in the system, pervasive evidence of lack of professionalism, when you have weak system that is built around individual than established structure, and people get away with different kind of things. On the next slide, I then spoke about things that need to be present that will ensure that we are able to adhere to professionalism and high ethical practices. So if you are looking for a tax regime that, tick the boxes, what are those elements that will be present? And in a way, we could begin to kind of evaluate our system and maybe understand why we may be where we are. And if we're looking for solution, it's also flipping it around to say, where are we on this? How can we move it forward? The first element that will be present is that in any system that is going to be sane and you are dealing with individual, there has to be law, order, and enforcement. Many of the countries around the world that we talk about as though they are so high in compliance and all of that, many times the reason they do so is because they know there are clear laws, and if you fail, even though they know there are laws and they are sure that the consequences is clear should you be non-compliant. Where are we with respect to that? Maybe, to some extent law is available, but are people really assured of the consequences for infraction? Are we enforcing? Number two is strong supervision. The authorities that are charged with monitoring and upholding standards, or bringing infractions to book, they are very active, they are very, they are effective, and they have built a reputation where they are respected for their monitoring and supervision. And maybe that's where, our institute, continue to be, a major driver in that area. How many times have we done, naming and shaming and ensuring that we really, really uphold strong ethical practices? Such systems have limited human interference. When you deal with people and you are moving from table to table, sometimes a lot of things happen. So systems and processes, driven through technology, help to prevent, too much of human interference. The fourth thing you will see in such environment is that the yield from taxes is always high, and the contribution ratio to the national revenue is significant. Our tax yield is not. Why? Because there are leakages. In fact, the little that is being paid, a significant part enter, individual wallets. Such environment have high tax morale because, everybody is encouraging someone. Everybody recognizes the fact that if I don't do that, the penalty is small. The social construct where the government itself is compelled to do more because people are doing their utmost. And of course, the system is efficient. And so on the next slide, I try to summarize together to say, to achieve what we said in the last slide, like I had mentioned, every stakeholder needs to recognize how they can contribute into this. And I grouped this into three. I said the revenue authorities, for example. If, for example, our administration is very heavy with technology, where we minimize human interventions, we invest in training, in capacity building, we ensure decent remuneration and motivation of officials, we will have done a lot, or we will have moved some step forward in ensuring that the system works well. And of course, because it's a human system, we also have mechanism for whistleblowing, for transparent disciplinary framework for misconduct. And the tone at the top is strong. Not that the bosses do what they would like and expect the people underneath to do otherwise. The professional body as ours is the second stakeholder, and we do have a role as, the body charged with this field. Regular update and enforcement of professional practice rule and ethical codes, continuous professional development and strong advocacy voice, including naming and shaming, and also celebrating excellence. Client and practitioner is the third, which is where we are, because for some of us, we're either practitioners or we are working for a client, or some of us even employ consultants. There has to be a strong drive for responsible tax culture. And we just had a session in the morning that this conversation is really at the heart of it. And it's almost like a chicken and the egg thing, which comes first. So we need to have a drive for a responsible tax culture. We have to elevate responsible corporate citizenship through compliance with our civic obligation, tax reporting and disclosure, and ensuring that a practitioner needs to recognize the multi-stakeholders obligation, that while you are there to make money, you do have an obligation to the society, to the country, and also to your client. I put here a few things that I believe as professionals we must pay attention to, and I say take heed, some ethical watch for practitioners to help you, because sometimes you mean to do well, but you find yourself in an environment where the demand by the client or the demand by the revenue authority can also shake your resolve. Number one, I say when acting for a client, your professional expertise is placed at the disposal of that particular client, and recognize that you owe that client a duty of care. And as a professional, you are expected to exercise reasonable care and skill when you are acting. And when you fail to do so, you can incur liability, you can expose yourself. One of my colleagues at work used to share a common saying. I think it was someone else that said, usually say it. He said, if anybody must go to jail, make sure you are not the one. While you are advising a client, if anybody must, just make sure you must have discharged your responsibility to that point where, as a professional, you are not the one, carrying the weight. All right, and that when you build a strong reputation that is based on high professionalism and ethical standards, you are ultimately rewarded. Many big brands that do so well, they do so because they are able to build a brand that people respect and trust as being professional and as being ethical. And it is important for you to understand your duty. This is talking to you now, assuming that you mean well, and that it is the process and the system that sometimes weaken your resolve. But recognize that you are a practitioner. So it's important that you recognize your duty and the scope of your responsibility. Know what is demanded and know what is being said indirectly. And evaluate your risks so that you know when to say, no, this doesn't go with me. Some other best practices along this line that you can inculcate. Number one, build capacity in your field of expertise. When you know your worth, there are certain things that client cannot push at you. Client is saying, I don't have this cannot happen. I say, but this is exactly how it's done. You must have capability in your field of expertise. Number two, you must know your clients. Do your background check. Don't just rush at collecting that, 200,000, 1 million, 2 million naira engagement, and then the exposure that the client is expecting you to face is liability that you may continue to pay for the rest of your life. Know your client, know their risk appetite, know whether they are delinquent taxpayer or they are people that are sincerely interested in obeying the law. All right? And ensure you have contract and the scope of your work documented, because when it fails, you can say, this is what you have engaged me to do, and you have to pay me for that. This other thing you're asking me is ultra my responsibility. Know how to identify conflict of interest and how to manage it. Have mechanism for ongoing monitoring of your work to know when things are deviating. Know what is required when you are dealing with revenue authorities and revenue officials. There are many offices, there are instances where what the leadership is saying may not have filtered through to the very junior level, and you are starting at the junior level, and you may have the tendency to believe that what that junior officer is telling you represents what the organization itself stands for. Know, how to deal with revenue authority. And of course, have self-discipline and act with integrity. The chairman of the Presidential Reform Committee was talking to us about tax reform, and I thought there were aspects of it, I explained it towards the end, that I think is also important that we recognize. If you move to, I think, 2 slides forward, where you have the tax reform and the future of tax practice. When this reform that we are expecting, when it comes through, some provisions there, is very important that we pay attention to it, because it's also, aimed at ensuring that there is more discipline. And that is the one relating to registration of agents or accreditation of agents. Revenue authorities will now have to accredit agents, and there are requirements and procedures that will be rolled out, including the responsibility that the supervising body, professional body like the CITN, will have to take in enforcing that the rule of professional conduct is upheld. It also requires that when this reform is passed, we will now get to the realm where tax consultants are required to issue statement of attestation for their returns, almost like an opinion. So you are saying this is how you have complied with the codes of professional conduct, or with the rule that is required, or with the law and legislation. And this is a very important thing, because now it's your own practicing license and your own membership number and all of that you are attaching to returns that you are rendering on behalf of the client. And when anything goes wrong, it's not just the taxpayer that will have a liability to pay. You also may be guilty of professional misconduct or negligence, and it's important that you recognize that. And even this process will ensure that the revenue authorities are able to track who are the tax consultant or the agent that have the preponderance for, their clients are never compliant. Their clients are always late. Their clients always have higher tax audit exposure when they are done. Meanwhile, a consultant has certified that the return has complied with all of the rules. What you will expect that this will do, if the analytics is used properly, is that over a period of time, we know who a proper tax consultant is and who, roadside consultant who are not professional, and that could ultimately impact your ability to practice in the future. Of course, that reform also have increased liability penalty regime. What it means is that if you don't do the right thing and you make your client to just walk past, what's supposed to be an important compliance requirement, and they incur penalty and incur liability, that could be something that the client could drag you. There are certain clients that will charge you to court if you expose them to undue risk and penalty. So it's really the reform. Part of it is that it's trying to instill, professionalism and high ethical standard in our practice. There are also provisions relating to you, the clients, requiring to disclose their tax planning schemes, to the revenue authorities. So imagine this, that you are helping a client and you have to disclose how you are helping them to comply with the law or the advice that you are giving them. Just imagine what level of professionalism and competence that you have to bring to bear. You definitely cannot be asking, client to go and disclose that, the tax planning scheme you are offering them is only going to help them to evade the law.
Mr. Olugbenro concluded this way.
Number one, the current tax practice environment indeed require concerted effort for improvement. Every one of us, there is a need for us to raise the level of professionalism, for us to raise the level of compliance to ethics, and that those of us in this room as tax practitioners must see ourselves as critical stakeholders, not just government, not just we, pointing the other finger at revenue authorities. Everyone, clients in the room, consultants in the room, right? Revenue authorities, supervising body. There's at least something that each stakeholder is responsible for. And I dare to say that practitioners that are professional and ethically upright will survive under any tax regime. There are men, as bad as the environment is, I've been practicing for a given number of years. It's not even possible, permissible, thinkable for me to assume that I will be involved in bribery or corruption in the trade of in the field of the practice. So it's possible. It's very possible. Sometimes when you talk to some individual small size player, they make it look like you cannot survive in this environment unless you are able to do something that is substandard. It's how you raise the profile of your practice. Which client is going to pay me? Or which office am I going to go and get that refund? If I do it, I'm done. All right? So a practitioner that understands that you can take your professionalism to a level where you can survive will have done a great deal for himself. And it's possible even in this environment. And driving professionalism requires that you stay committed, you stay consistent, and know when to walk away. It's not all briefs that is for you. And for CITN, I believe we are doing a lot already, but it's important that we continue to have, to continue to play this critical role of ensuring that the profession is upheld. And there is a lot of hope that this reform will help in a way, and we all just have to continue to contribute our quota. Let me pause there so that we can continue the engagement. Thank you so much for listening to me, and I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Olugbenro, for very insightful presentation. I will now go straight to my panelists. You have 5 minutes each to make your intervention. And I'm not going to be asking any question. You will listen to the presentation, which you've had the benefit of reviewing. There should be some aspects of the presentation that strike, you. Can you react accordingly? And I would like to first invite Mrs. Titilola Akilawo to please react to the presentation.
Every profession has its code of ethics. How have we been able to enforce this? How have we been able to bring erring professionals to book? Have we been able, like in the CITN Code of Ethics, we have the investigative panel, we have the disciplinary panel. How have we been able to enforce or even get members that erred to be investigated, not to talk of being disciplined? Until and unless we get to that point of enforcement, to make other people to know that it's not in their best interest to be unethical, we must be able, among ourselves, to come up with a decent mode of punishment for unethical members.
There are people studying taxation in our various universities. They must recognize the distinction between taxation and being an accountant. It's not enough. A tax practitioner knows accounting and something more. It's not enough to be a lawyer. A tax practitioner knows law and something more. It's not enough to be an economist. A tax practitioner knows economics and something more.
What is it that the practitioners can do in this area that we're talking about balancing ethics and professionalism? It's about promoting, I say practitioners should just practice. Promoting integrity, remain informed, avoid conflict, communicating boundaries, track and document advice, insist on legal compliance, consult when in doubt, and exit on ethical engagement.
I think we can do more in building collective trust between the tax authorities and the taxpayer. There was a study in 2022 that said that about 42% of taxpayers underreport their income. So you have taxpayers underreporting their income for tax purposes. So when the taxman goes out there for audit, he has it at the back of the mind that, hey, there's something not accurate about this taxpayer's records, even if the records are accurate. Now, if you ask the taxpayer that, why are you underreporting your income? The answer you probably get is that, I need to prepare my tax returns in such a way that when the taxman comes for audit, he has something to take home. And the tax man comes to review the books and says, no, I can't go back to my office without having a tax liability, regardless of how perfect your records are. So I think we need to have a reorientation and build a better environment that instills trust.
Those interventions from the panelists will come to you in the next part of this outing. Remember, it is still the 27th Annual Tax Conference of the CITN loading. Keep watching.